A battle broke out between two dormitories, the White Cats dorm and the Black Dogs dorm. Romeo, as the leader of the Black Dogs, and Juliet, as the leader of the White Cats, both signaled their subordinates to begin the attack. Once the fight started, their followers immediately clashed, striking each other without mercy, while Romeo and Juliet kept their eyes locked on one another. Hazuki tried to help Romeo, but he stopped her because he wanted to defeat Juliet on his own. The duel between the leaders then began. Romeo and Juliet charged forward, attacking each other. Dahlia Academy was a prestigious school where the eastern nation of Tuwa and the western kingdom coexisted, yet the eastern students of the Black Dogs dorm and the western students of the White Cats dorm were caught in a storm of conflict. When the two leaders were about to fight, Scott asked Juliet to let him take her place, saying that he was willing to protect her with his life. Seeing what he considered an irritating scene, Romeo struck Scott and lifted him up, belittling him and telling him to lock Juliet in her dorm instead. Juliet quickly stepped in to help Scott and threw Romeo aside. She told Romeo that she did not need protection from anyone and urged him to attack her with all his strength. Romeo admitted that he had no intention of attacking a woman as it could hurt his pride. Juliet became annoyed because Romeo kept underestimating her. Suddenly, Anne from the White Cats prefect group arrived with her team, coming to put an end to the conflict. Anne reminded everyone that the chaos was inappropriate. Romeo immediately rejected her words, refusing to obey a White Cats prefect. Anne then said she would report Romeo to the Black Dogs prefect. Hearing this, Romeo fell silent, unable to respond. After that, the White Cats members dispersed. Scott shouted that he swore to defeat Romeo, but Hazuki told him he was nowhere near Romeo's level. Later in the dorm, the Black Dogs students were upset about the prefect's intervention earlier. Prefects held the highest authority over school discipline. The Black Dogs students were confident they could beat the White Cats and placed their hopes on Romeo. At that time, Romeo looked gloomy. Hazuki offered to cheer him up, but her behavior only annoyed the other students. She quickly clarified that she had no inappropriate intentions toward Romeo, but without realizing it, Romeo had already walked away. Romeo was frustrated and unsure what to do. Since grade school, he and Juliet had always been at odds, and their rivalry continued through middle school and into high school. He was frustrated because nothing had changed. The truth was, Romeo had always loved Juliet. He never wanted to fight her and only wanted to make sure she was never hurt by anyone else. He was especially irritated with Scott for so casually saying he would protect Juliet, because those were words Romeo himself had always wanted to say to her. He was sick of the act and unsure how to get Juliet's attention. He wondered if he should just confess his feelings outright. If it worked, it would be amazing, but if it failed, he would never be able to face her again. Meanwhile, Juliet was practicing swordsmanship in the training hall with her friends. She moved so skillfully that her opponent surrendered. Juliet thanked her opponent. Scott handed her a towel and remarked that she was good at humbling men. Juliet admitted she was not that skilled yet. She only wanted the strength to change the world. She said that whenever she spoke about it, people would laugh even though she was serious. For that reason, Juliet did not want to be underestimated, but Romeo always seemed to hold back and treat her lightly. She was so annoying that she accidentally tore Scott's towel. Unexpectedly, Romeo saw this from a distance. He could not hear exactly what Juliet was saying, but he was sure she was upset, which made him feel like he had no chance at all. Suddenly, Romeo noticed grade school students from the Black Dogs dorm being caught by high school students from the White Cats dorm. Apparently, the younger students had painted graffiti on a door. Juliet asked them why they did it. One of them explained that the White Cats grade school students had mocked them by calling them weak. A friend of Juliet's pushed the boy for his rude words, causing him to get a nosebleed. Juliet stopped her friend and said that it was true the Black Dogs grade school students were weak. She told them that insulting back was not real revenge because it would not help a friend in trouble. Juliet even dismissed the idea of such retaliation. The boy with the nosebleed grew upset at being underestimated and pushed Juliet. She said that this was what real strength looked like, and it turned out he was capable of doing it. Hearing her words, the boy was moved. Juliet immediately wiped the blood from his nose and told him to go home, warning that she would not go easy on him next time. She even tapped his nose lightly. Juliet's friend wondered why she was acting so soft-hearted. Juliet told them not to let their emotions get stirred up just because of the younger students, since the White Cats had high standards. Romeo realized that it was actually Juliet's nobility that made him like her, and he felt that she should know about his feelings. That meant he needed to gather his courage, and he planned to meet her in secret. Without even realizing it, he ended up walking toward her. Juliet asked what his reason was for being there. Romeo said he did not come to start a fight. He was about to explain his real reason, but found it so hard to say that he blurted out something strange instead, then quickly ran away. At that moment, Juliet admitted she was annoyed because she felt Romeo had once again made a fool of her. Romeo shouted, calling himself a loser. Cantho and Ego saw him and wondered what he had been doing at the gym earlier. Not long after, they saw Juliet come out of the gym. From Mavo's observation, Juliet usually walked back to her dorm alone, and that was the perfect chance for them to defeat the leader of the White Cats. Cantho prepared their masks so their faces would not be recognized. Chizuru was also with them, saying that Romeo's way of dealing with the White Cats was far too slow. Juliet was walking alone toward her dorm when Ego and Cantho followed her from behind, already carrying blunt weapons. When Juliet turned around, they froze up and acted awkwardly. Even though they were wearing masks, she recognized them as Ego and Cantho. Since their cover was blown, they went ahead and attacked. Cantho swung his stick toward her, but she dodged and kicked him back. Ego then came from behind, ready to strike, but Juliet swiftly kicked him down as well. Suddenly, Chizuru sprayed pepper solution into Juliet's eyes. Ego grabbed her, holding her tightly so she could not break free, and Cantho covered her mouth with tape. Juliet had no idea why they were suddenly attacking her. But to Chizuru, this was part of the internation rivalry, and they would do anything for the Black Dogs to win. Chizuru then used a box cutter to slash Juliet's uniform. Just then, Romeo arrived and pulled Juliet away from them. Ego was confused as to why Romeo was rescuing her, while Chizuru said Juliet had stolen their target. Before long, someone was about to pass by, so Chizuru told Ego and Cantho to retreat. Romeo was shocked when he saw Juliet's torn uniform. She opened her eyes, heard his voice, and backed away in fear. He began to wonder if she thought he was the one who attacked her, so he asked her not to misunderstand. Juliet, with tears in her eyes, quickly left. That night, Chizuru, Ego, and Cantho came to Romeo's dorm to ask what he had done earlier. They wanted to talk outside, but without a word, Romeo immediately struck all three of them, furious that they had caused him what felt like a personal disaster. He thought about going to Juliet's dorm to explain the misunderstanding, but figured it would be pointless. Suddenly, an arrow flew past and struck near Chizuru's head. It carried a letter from Juliet asking Romeo to meet her at the fountain in the central plaza right away. Romeo went there and found Juliet already waiting, holding a sword. He was certain she wanted to challenge him. Juliet asked whether he had attacked her earlier or saved her. If he had attacked, she would fight him with the sword she carried. If he had saved her, she wanted to know why, since they were supposed to be enemies. The real reason was love, but Romeo could not bring himself to say it because he was not ready, so he decided to lie like he usually did. Juliet said that if he saved her out of pity, that was just as hurtful, because she did not want to be pitied by anyone. She cried, saying she could not stand being seen as weak by him any longer. Romeo began to realize that maybe she had cried earlier because of that. He tried to deny it, but Juliet pointed out that he always held back his attacks against her and avoided fighting, which to her was the same as underestimating her. Since they were kids, Juliet and Romeo had always been at each other's throats, to the point where their teachers often scolded them. All Romeo knew about Persia was that she was the only daughter of a noble family from the Western Kingdom, but in her homeland, titles and wealth were only passed down to men. If things stayed that way, she would lose everything. Romeo eventually understood why Juliet wanted the power to change the world. She wanted the strength to stand on equal ground with men, the intelligence so other nobles wouldn't look down on her, and the influence so no one could ignore her, all to change the laws of their world. Romeo realized he had been ignoring her feelings. His attempts to protect her had only ended up hurting her. Romeo decided he wouldn't hold back anymore. He told Juliet to fight him, and she thanked him before asking him to show his full strength. She had handed him one of her swords. They both got ready to duel, all because of Romeo's hesitation that had wounded her before. As they drew their swords, Romeo suddenly blurted out that he loved her and asked her to be his girlfriend. Juliet's face instantly turned red. Romeo reassured her that he was being serious, but Juliet got annoyed and attacked, thinking he was just messing with her again. Romeo told her he wasn't joking, and that the reason he'd never fought her seriously was because he loved her. He insisted he had never thought of her as weak, but Juliet just couldn't bring herself to trust him yet and kept attacking. They continued clashing until Romeo finally said everything he had been holding in. He would even change the world if that's what it took to stay by her side. Juliet was taken aback and ended up shoving him into a fountain. Walking over to him, she called him an idiot, saying she didn't understand why he was talking like that. She doubted he could pull it off alone, so she said she'd help him. To Romeo's surprise, Juliet agreed to be his girlfriend, but only if he could prove he could change the world. Romeo could hardly believe what he'd heard and asked her to say it again. Overwhelmed, he started crying tears of joy. Koksha, who happened to be there, was shocked too, since Romeo had always thought Juliet hated him. Juliet admitted she had never said she hated him. When Romeo asked if she loved him, Juliet said she didn't know. She told him to keep their relationship a secret. Romeo agreed without hesitation, saying it didn't matter as long as he could be with her. After that, they started dating in secret. The next morning on the way to school, Romeo caught up to her and asked if they could walk together now that they were a couple, but Juliet quickly told him not to talk to her. Romeo was stunned by her reaction. A moment later, Scott and Hasuki arrived to meet their respective leaders, and that's when Romeo realized Juliet had acted that way because other people were nearby. That day, the students from the Black Doggy dorm and the White Cat dorm crossed paths again, ready to start another brawl. Hasuki complained that the White Cat students were ruining the scenery, and Scott, not wanting to be outdone, fired back with his own remark. Juliet then suggested that they settle things with a match. Hasuki happily accepted the challenge, but she was startled to see Romeo's flustered expression that to her resembled a sheepish goat. Romeo quickly switched to a more intimidating look. Once the fight began, the students charged at each other without hesitation, trading blows without fear. Juliet swung her staff at Romeo, but he easily caught it. The battle grew more intense. Scott took a powerful kick from Hasuki, and Hasuki then offered to help Romeo take on Juliet. Scott, on the other hand, wanted to assist Juliet. But when both sides looked around, they realized Romeo and Juliet were no longer in the fight. It turned out Romeo had pulled Juliet aside to another spot. Juliet was confused about what he was doing. Romeo admitted he simply wanted to know more about her. Juliet immediately gave him information about her blood type, birthday, and eyesight, but that wasn't what Romeo meant. He explained that he wanted to spend time alone with her. Hearing this, Juliet chose to leave. Romeo didn't expect her reaction. He thought that couples were supposed to do romantic things together. He grabbed Juliet's hand and said that even without a reason, and even if there was danger, he still wanted to be with her. He was about to confess his feelings when Hasuki suddenly showed up to help him. Romeo quickly pretended to be restraining Juliet. Romeo refused Hasuki's help, but Juliet, clearly annoyed, kicked him under the chin, sending him sprawling. She left immediately. Hasuki went over to Romeo, surprised that he had been taken down by Juliet. Later that afternoon, while Juliet was in the changing room, her friends praised her for defeating Romeo. After they left, Juliet's thoughts drifted to her past. When she was little, she had wanted to give flowers to her father, but he turned her down, telling her not to bother him with unimportant things because he was busy. Romeo, on the other hand, always wanted to be with her for no reason at all. Suddenly, she heard Romeo's voice calling her name. Looking around, she spotted him at the window and was startled to see him there. She thought to herself that Romeo was acting like a flirt. Romeo said there was something he wanted to tell her. Juliet cracked the window open slightly, and Romeo quickly apologized for earlier. He explained that he had asked some grade school kids what people in the West do when they're dating, and they told him that giving a rosary was a sign of love. Romeo then offered the rosary to Juliet, asking her to accept it as proof of his feelings. Just then, Scott interrupted, asking Romeo what he was doing. Romeo countered by asking why Scott was there, and Scott explained that he was standing guard. Scott was convinced Romeo would try to attack Juliet when she was off guard. Juliet shut the window again, and Scott leaped at Romeo to catch him. The two of them fell, and Juliet saw Romeo holding up the rosary he had planned to give her. When Romeo regained consciousness, he was back at the dorm, resting on Hasuki's lap. Confused, he asked why he was there. Hasuki claimed Juliet had been cruel enough to push him off the roof, and also informed him that the Black Doggy dorm students were now storming the White Cat dorm to avenge him. They weren't just doing it for Romeo, but to protect the pride of their dorm. Hearing this, Romeo tried to run off, but Hasuki stopped him, wanting to take care of him. However, Romeo managed to swap places with Yotari, the dorm's dog, and slip away. He chased after Juliet, but she kept avoiding him, not wanting to stop because the Black Doggy dorm students were chasing her too. Romeo told his friends to stop, saying he would go after Juliet himself. Suddenly, Scott and his friends blocked Romeo's path. Scott couldn't believe Romeo would gang up on Juliet and challenged him to fight again. Romeo was baffled. How had things turned into this when he just wanted to give Juliet a gift? He stayed silent while his dorm mates fought the White Cat students, holding onto the rosary and remembering Juliet's words about proving he could change the world. Lost in thought, Romeo didn't notice Scott and two others ganging up on him. In the struggle, the rosary broke. Romeo's energy seemed to drain away as he walked off, leaving everyone wondering what was wrong. Then, without warning, Romeo lifted a huge statue. He was furious. Not because of the fight, but because the rosary, which had cost him so much, had been broken by them. Romeo attacked everyone with the statue he was holding, swinging it around to take down anyone involved in the fight, whether they were from the Black Dogs or the White Cats. That night, he was punished by being told to pull weeds near the lake. Feeling frustrated as he looked at the broken rosary, he was about to throw it into the lake when Juliet appeared and stopped him. She already knew about his punishment for damaging the statue. Romeo apologized for breaking the gift he had wanted to give her. Juliet then asked him to row a boat for her. Romeo worried someone might see them, but Juliet reassured him it was fine since it was already dark. He found it strange considering Juliet was usually the one reminding him to avoid being seen by others. They got on the boat together and headed toward the middle of the lake. Juliet enjoyed the cool night breeze while Romeo couldn't believe he was alone with her on a boat. Juliet then took the rosary from his pocket, realizing that was what he had wanted to give her. Romeo admitted he could just buy another one in town, so he didn't mind if she threw it away. Instead, Juliet told him to close his eyes. When he opened them again, he was startled to see her face right in front of his. Blushing, he realized she had placed a rosary around his neck. Romeo was surprised and asked if she had fixed it with magic, but Juliet explained that it was her own rosary. He then learned that people from her culture wore rosaries every morning for prayer, and she gave hers only to someone truly special as a good luck charm. This particular rosary had been a gift from her mother when she got accepted into the school. It was precious to her because she prayed with it daily, making it a sincere symbol of her feelings. Juliet asked Romeo to take care of it, but he said such a valuable item should stay with her, and that her feelings were enough for him. Juliet immediately began rowing back to shore. Romeo stood to try and stop her, but ended up falling into the lake. Not understanding why Juliet was upset, he called out for her to help him since he couldn't swim, but she simply left. The next day at school, Romeo was searching for Juliet in the courtyard when Hasuki approached and invited him to go into town with her to visit the Dahlia Garden. Romeo refused, explaining he already had plans with someone else. Curious, Hasuki asked who he was going with. Just then, an adorable-looking boy walked up to Romeo, and Romeo quickly left with him. Only then did Hasuki realize why Romeo had never shown interest in her. She assumed he was into boys. Shocked, she fainted and was immediately taken to the student infirmary by her friends. Romeo hadn't expected Juliet's disguise as a cute boy to fool Hasuki so easily that would seem to have caused an entirely different misunderstanding. The day before, Romeo and Juliet had gone to the confessional to talk. Romeo had asked her out for the next day, since it would be the only day in May when they could leave the dorms. Juliet refused, saying it was impossible. If they had to meet in secret even just to talk, there was no way they could go on a date openly. Romeo then handed her a uniform and a wig for a disguise, both handmade by him. He was confident they could go on a date without being recognized. Juliet called him an idiot, warning that it would be dangerous if they were caught. Romeo looked disappointed, saying that if things kept going this way, they'd never be able to have a date. Seeing him upset, Juliet told him that even if Mia cried, it wouldn't change anything. Dating was impossible for them. Yet the next day, she wore the disguise and went out with him anyway. Suddenly, Scott appeared, calling out Juliet's name. They thought their cover had been blown, but Scott explained he was just searching for her because he could sense her scent near Romeo. He then ran off to look for her, hoping to invite her to tour the city. Romeo felt relieved that her disguise had worked and figured it was finally time to enjoy their date. Not long after, Romeo's friends approached and asked who the student with him was. Romeo claimed it was a relative from middle school named Chulio. His friends remarked that the name sounded strange and that the face seemed oddly familiar. To Romeo's dismay, they started blushing as they stared at Juliet in disguise. Soon, even more female students began approaching, curious about the cute boy with Romeo. As the crowd grew larger, Romeo became increasingly annoyed. They were completely ruining his date plans. They eventually arrived at Dahlia City. Both the city and Dahlia Academy had been established as a symbol of friendship between the Western nation and Tua. To Romeo's surprise, his friends had followed them there. It turned out they wanted to hang out with Juliet as well. Romeo told them they would have to defeat him first if they wanted to spend time with her. Mia was puzzled to see Romeo looking so cheerful, especially since, according to Shizuka, he usually didn't care about those around him, had a stern face, disliked chatting, and often gave off an intimidating aura. At that moment, Romeo was picking out a rosary, while Juliet was surrounded by friends, which meant he couldn't give it to her in front of them. His frustration didn't stop there. When they went to a restaurant he had planned to visit, every seat had already been reserved. That ruined his idea of having a meal together while enjoying the ocean view. Romeo still couldn't figure out why his friends kept following him. In the end, they settled for eating ramen. Everyone tried to convince Juliet to sit with them. That was when Chartreuse from the White Cat's dorm happened to be at the same restaurant, enjoying her meal. She wasn't surprised by the commotion caused by the Black Dog students, but she was briefly startled when she saw Juliet's face. Romeo and the others ate ramen together, though he couldn't help wondering why they ended up in such a dull place. Juliet struggled to use chopsticks and accidentally spilled ramen on her clothes. Romeo quickly tugged at the hem of her pants so the hot broth wouldn't burn her skin, but Juliet yelped and hit him in embarrassment. Afterward, they went to an amusement park. Romeo hadn't expected his lunch and shopping plans with Juliet to fall apart like that, so he grabbed her hand and led her to the haunted house. Inside, he felt relieved to finally be alone with her in the dark. Suddenly, a zombie appeared. Romeo scolded it while Juliet immediately struck it before running out, refusing to go back inside. Romeo rushed to look for her, worried she might think of this as the worst date ever. Meanwhile, Chizuru was shopping with Kakushou and Eigo when he spotted Romeo looking downcast. Wanting to get back at him, Chizuru kicked Romeo into the sea and stepped on his head. Suddenly, Juliet arrived and scolded Chizuru, saying that even if Romeo could be foolish at times, he still meant a lot to her. Chizuru then tried to trick Juliet into being friends, but she threw him aside without hesitation. Later, Romeo and Juliet went up to the tower to talk. Romeo had thought Juliet had gone home, but she explained she had only gone to the restroom because the wig she was wearing was making her head itch. He suspected she might be upset because their date didn't go smoothly, but she smiled and told him she had heard about how different he seemed compared to his usual gloomy self when they were together. She can wonder how someone from Tua could handle such spicy ramen. To Juliet, a date wasn't just about eating and shopping. It was about getting to know each other. Because of that, she considered their date a success. Romeo was touched by her words. Unfortunately, Scott appeared and the two started fighting again. Romeo couldn't believe how their alone time always ended that way. Unexpectedly, when Romeo and Juliet returned to the dorm, Chartreux happened to see them together. When Romeo and Juliet were spending time together, Romeo asked her to keep her schedule free for the next 3 days since that day marked 1 month since they started dating. Juliet was surprised that Romeo had actually been counting, especially since their relationship could end at any moment. For Romeo, every day in their relationship felt like a life or death gamble, and the fact that they had made it a whole month without anyone finding out made him want to celebrate together. Juliet laughed, not expecting Romeo to be the type to get carried away with emotions. When Juliet didn't immediately agree, Romeo sulked. Not wanting to see him like that, Juliet finally gave in. Just then, Scott and Hasuki walked up to them. In a panic, Romeo and Juliet started pretending to fight so their relationship wouldn't be discovered. It turned out Scott and Hasuki came to tell them that Chartreux had returned to school after taking a year off. At that moment, Chartreux asked for a driver to stop the car and told him to inform the students to welcome her. The students quickly got ready. When Chartreux arrived, the entire White Cats dorm cheered excitedly. Chartreux went over to Scott, asking him to entertain her, but then suddenly hit him in the face, saying his presence was boring her. Juliet greeted Chartreux, and Chartreux walked over to her, touching her hair. She seemed curious why none of the Black Dog's dorm students came to greet her even though she had told all students to welcome her. Romeo bluntly said he refused to do so because the Black Dogs weren't her servants. Chartreux claimed she could make him obey her. Hearing that, Romeo stepped forward, ready to confront her, but stopped when Chartreux quietly said she knew he was dating Juliet. Everyone was shocked to see Romeo freeze like that. Chartreux added that she knew about their disguise, but Romeo pretended not to understand what she was talking about. Then Chartreux showed him a photo she had taken of him and Juliet on a date. Romeo slumped to the ground, admitting defeat. Hasuki couldn't believe what she was seeing and even praised Chartreux's cunning. Romeo was stunned that their relationship had been discovered so quickly, and he knew that if things continued like this, they could be forced to break up. Chartreux approached him, saying she would keep the secret if he agreed to her condition, becoming her loyal pet. At first, Romeo refused, but when Chartreux casually mentioned that her shoulders were sore, Romeo found himself giving her a massage. He realized he had no other choice but to protect their secret. Juliet, however, looked at him with disgust. Hasuki walked up and slapped him repeatedly, trying to snap him out of it. His friends were also confused as to why he was letting himself be pushed around like this. Later, Chartreux blew a whistle to summon Romeo, warning that he had better show up by the third whistle or she would expose the dating photo. Romeo knelt down, begging her not to do that, but she didn't care. She only wanted him to be her obedient pet. She even reminded him that if the truth got out, he would lose his supporters and his popularity. Romeo knew that if that happened, Juliet would never be able to achieve her dream, leaving him with no other option. Not long after, Romeo sat alone, deep in thought, when Juliet appeared and asked why he had been alone with Chartreux earlier. She said she didn't really care who he spent time with, but his expression when looking at Chartreux seemed off. She half-jokingly asked if he preferred girls with a more noticeable figure. Romeo denied it, saying she misunderstood, when suddenly the whistle blew again. He quickly said he had to go, leaving Juliet confused about what he was really doing. This time, Chartreux ordered him to crawl and escort her to the dorm. The Black Dog's students were baffled by what they saw. Romeo suggested it would be faster if he carried her, but Chartreux insisted on treating him like her pet. even dangling a dog bone in front of him to motivate him. Romeo refused until she replaced the bone with the photo of him and Juliet on their date. At that, he sped up instantly. The Black Dog's dorm students watched in shock, and Chizuru even suspected Romeo had betrayed them, saying he deserved the harshest punishment. After dropping Charduk off, Romeo crawled back toward Juliet, leaving her stunned. He apologized for making her wait, saying there was a reason for what he was doing. But before he could explain, the whistle sounded again. Charduk asked Romeo to catch a deer for her because she was craving it. Like it or not, Romeo went along with her request, while Juliet kept waiting for him until nightfall. When Romeo finally returned to Juliet, he was covered in blood and carrying the deer. Juliet was completely shocked, but Romeo tried to calm her down. He was frustrated because Charduk seemed to be enjoying herself a little too much. Juliet then asked what the whistle sound had to do with him. Romeo couldn't give her an explanation, but he promised he would never fail to protect her. Juliet believed that Romeo would never lose and told him not to wear a face that wasn't truly his. Not long after, the whistle sounded again, and instead of stopping him, Juliet urged him to go quickly, adding that she was looking forward to celebrating their 1-month anniversary. When Romeo met Charduk, he found out she only wanted to see her pet's face. The students in the White Cat's dorm thought the Black Dogs had probably been defeated. Hearing this, Romeo didn't care. What mattered was for him to keep obeying until he could find Charduk's weakness, and he had to figure it out within 3 days before his anniversary with Juliet. Romeo was determined to pay her back for what she had done. However, when he returned to his own dorm, he discovered that his friends had thrown his belongings outside. They'd refused to let a White Cat servant into the Black Dog's dorm. Koka stated that Romeo should have faced severe punishment, but they forgave him because of Hasuki. Hasuki defended Romeo with all her might, convinced he had not betrayed Tuwa, and guessed that maybe Charduk had found some weakness of his. They warned that if Romeo was ever caught betraying them, he would never forgive him. Romeo was truly grateful to Hasuki for standing up for him. 2 days before the anniversary, Charduk continued to treat Romeo like her servant, ordering him to put on her shoes, feed her, and even deal with troublemakers for her. Romeo was extremely annoyed but forced himself to stay calm so he could keep searching for her weakness. Unfortunately, during his observations, he realized Charduk was highly intelligent, physically strong, skilled at charming people, and seemed to have no weaknesses at all. Romeo came to understand that being a princess wasn't just about appearances. He was baffled. Plenty of people were eager to fulfill Charduk's wishes, so why was he the one stuck being her victim? While Romeo was crawling on the ground escorting Charduk to dinner, she suddenly told him to turn around. Romeo didn't understand why, but it turned out Juliet was walking ahead of them. That night, Charduk shared a room with Juliet again, but this time she seemed distant toward her. The day before the celebration, Romeo asked Juliet about Charduk. Juliet was surprised by the question, and Romeo admitted he was just curious. Juliet explained that she and Charduk had been childhood friends who used to spend a lot of time together, but ever since returning, Charduk had been acting cold toward her. Suddenly, Charduk's whistle blew again. Romeo noticed it always happened whenever he was talking to Juliet. Juliet tried to hold him back, but Romeo was sure she must be angry at him. If things kept going this way, their relationship might end, and he couldn't let that happen. He had to settle the matter before their anniversary. The next day, the day of the celebration, early in the morning, the school's information center called Charduk to the principal's office. In reality, it was just a ruse Romeo had set up so he could search her room. He was looking for anything he could use against her, but before he could find anything, Charduk returned. She suspected someone had tricked her to get into her room. Believing the intruder was still hiding somewhere inside, she declared she would have that person expelled from school. Charduk checked under the desk but didn't find anyone. Then she looked under the bed, but there was nothing there either. She opened her wardrobe yet still found no one. At that moment, Charduk started to panic. It turned out that Romeo had discovered something unusual in her room, a hidden space behind her mirror. What was even more surprising was that the entire secret room was filled with photos of Juliet. Romeo suspected that Charduk must have feelings for Juliet. Charduk denied it, and when Romeo tried to take the photos, she stopped him, saying they were her collection. Romeo began teasing her, imagining what Juliet and the other students from the White Cat's dorm would think if they found out that the princess of their kingdom had secretly gathered photos of Juliet. Charduk immediately tried to attack him. Romeo suspected that Charduk wanted to break him and Juliet apart because she was jealous. Frustrated, Charduk pushed him away and admitted that Juliet had always been by her side, always listened to her, and was her most precious and important friend. Charduk was upset that Juliet had chosen to be with Romeo instead, something she couldn't forgive. She pleaded with Romeo not to take Juliet away from her because Juliet meant so much to her. Romeo then realized that Charduk truly liked Juliet. Soon after, they heard Juliet's voice from outside the door, and Romeo discovered that Juliet was actually Chartruk's roommate. Panic set in for Chartruk. Her photos of Juliet were scattered everywhere, and she didn't want Juliet to find out about her feelings. Romeo advised her not to give up and suggested buying some time. When Juliet opened the door, she suspected someone else was in the room, but Chartruk blocked her way. Juliet tried to enter, yet Chartruk kept stopping her and tried to start a conversation at the door. Growing suspicious, Juliet insisted on coming inside, explaining she had an urgent matter. When Juliet finally stepped into the room, all the scattered photos had already been cleared away. She went to fix her hair in front of the mirror. Chartruk assumed Juliet must have an important plan given how tense her face looked. Juliet was confused about why she was being asked that, and Chartruk admitted she felt like Juliet might not come back. Juliet didn't understand her meaning, assuring her that no matter what happened, she would always stay by her side because Chartruk was her friend. Juliet apologized for calling her Char, but Chartruk told her that only Juliet was allowed to call her that. She held Juliet's hand tightly, and for a moment, they both felt like things were just like the old days. Juliet then left, saying she had promised to meet someone else. After Juliet was gone, Chartruk opened the mirror again and found Romeo looking at the photos. She checked to make sure he hadn't stolen any. Chartruk asked why he had helped her when she had treated him so poorly. Romeo explained that if the truth came out, he wouldn't be able to use it against her anymore, and besides, he understood what it was like to be unable to confess feelings to someone you liked. Chartruk told him that as long as he was dating Juliet, Juliet would be in danger, and that was why she couldn't give her blessing. Romeo called her a girl who wasn't cute, to which Chartruk agreed, saying she was the tired princess from the West. That night, Romeo met Juliet by the lake and apologized for being late. He was surprised that she wasn't angry, and she explained something good had happened. Romeo told her not to worry about him asking about Chartruk. Juliet had already thought about it and said she could understand if he was curious about questionable things. Romeo quickly denied it, calling it a misunderstanding. He was shocked to see the rosary he had given her was whole again and that she was wearing it. Juliet explained that she had repaired it because she could never throw it away. Romeo was moved to tears, and Juliet worried that someone might see him like that. From a distance, Chartruk had been watching them. She decided to let Romeo be for the night because she owed him a favor for what he had done earlier, but only for that night. Since he was a kid, none of Romeo's classmates wanted to team up with him because they thought he was scary. They didn't even want to get involved with him at all. Romeo even started to believe he didn't need friends in the first place. But unlike everyone else, Hasuki never disliked him. Dahlia High School was about to hold the midterm exams, and Hasuki was getting ready for school, feeling genuinely excited about them. That day, Romeo encouraged his friends to give their best in the exams, telling them to aim for the highest scores and beat the White Cats. Everyone became fired up and determined to face the White Cats head-on. Juliet once again disguised herself as Chulio because Romeo had invited her to come meet him. Chulio found it odd that Romeo wanted her to watch the Black Doggy dorm students study. Romeo explained that it was part of the Black Doggy study camp tradition. 3 days before the exams, they would spend 72 intense hours studying until they collapsed, and no one was allowed to leave the dorm during that period. He invited Chulio because he wouldn't be able to see her during those 3 days. Chulio scolded him, saying he should be able to restrain himself. Meanwhile, Eigo and Kantho asked Chizuru to join the study session, but Chizuru refused because he didn't want to get close to anyone. When Chartruk saw Chulio, she suddenly decided to participate, but Romeo commented that Chizuru's foolishness might spread like a disease. Chizuru shot back, calling Romeo the kind of student who nearly failed every year. The two were about to start a fight when Hasuki suddenly arrived and scolded them. Hasuki appeared so strict, calling them brainless pigs who loved to cause trouble. To Julio's surprise, all the Black Doggy dorm students showed deep respect for Hasuki. They immediately straightened up and followed her orders without complaint. Julio couldn't believe how different Hasuki was compared to her usual self. Hasuki even threw books at Chulio and Romeo for talking during the session. Hasuki wondered why Julio, who she thought was a middle school student, was even in the study camp. Romeo explained that Chulio's academic level was on par with a high school student. Hasuki allowed her to stay because she didn't want the camp to kick out anyone. Chulio was still puzzled about Hasuki's sudden change in personality. It turned out that whenever Hasuki wore her glasses, she took on a more serious role. Despite her strictness, she was one of the smartest people in the Black Doggy dorm and took full responsibility for making sure no one failed during study camp. Hasuki then gave the students a test to measure their knowledge. Romeo tried to show off to Julio with question number 1, but ended up falling asleep. As punishment, Hasuki pinched his eyelids to wake him up. Chizuru treated the test like a challenge to see how well he could cheat. using his phone to look up answers. Giulio immediately called him out, saying that a guy looks cooler when he faces challenges honestly. Hearing that, Kantho encouraged Chizuru to teach Giulio a lesson, but instead Chizuru broke his own phone. Kantho was baffled that Chizuru would actually listen to Giulio. He tried to tell Eigo about it, only to find Eigo doing something even stranger. He was sketching a woman's chest shape into his graph. Hazuki came over, asking them to focus on the test. After the test, she explained how to solve the problems correctly. Giulio found it strange that Romeo didn't seem to enjoy studying, and he never complained. Romeo explained that if he failed at such a prestigious school, he would be sent back to his hometown. He also said Hazuki worked hard to make sure no one failed and truly cared for every Black Doggy dorm member, so everyone felt grateful to her. That night, Romeo escorted Juliet back to her dorm. She was planning to return by passing through the underground waterway. Juliet said she had enjoyed the study camp that day since the White Cats never held activities like that. She mentioned that they wouldn't be able to see each other until the exams ended, but she didn't mean she felt lonely. After Juliet entered the waterway, Hazuki suddenly appeared, surprising Romeo. She explained that he had suddenly disappeared, so she came to find him. Romeo assured her he hadn't gone far as he was still within the dorm grounds. He thanked Hazuki for helping him understand the lessons and said he was confident he would pass because of her. Hazuki felt relieved to hear that and was happy to see Romeo smiling again, as he had been acting strange around Chartreuse earlier. She suspected he might have been hiding something from her, but Romeo didn't deny it since Hazuki was his friend. Hazuki reminded him that they were allies and that she wouldn't mind if he asked her for anything. After Hazuki left, Chartreuse suddenly appeared and pinched Romeo's cheek, catching him off guard. Chartreuse was furious when she found out Romeo had smuggled Juliet into the Black Dog dorm by disguising her as a boy. She kicked him and called him indecent. She even threatened him, warning that if he ever pulled something like that again, there would be consequences. Romeo quickly apologized, surprised that Chartreuse had still been keeping an eye on him. Chartreuse accused him of being greedy for getting close to another girl and warned him to make sure Hazuki never found out about his relationship with Juliet, because if she did, the truth could spread to everyone. Romeo disagreed, saying Hazuki wasn't that kind of person. He trusted her deeply because they had known each other since grade school. But to Chartreuse, the fact that he had kept the relationship a secret for so long actually proved he didn't fully trust Hazuki. Romeo denied that, saying that everyone has their own secrets. Without another word, Chartreuse slipped away into the drainage tunnel. In truth, Romeo did want to be honest with Hazuki, but he was afraid that if he told her, their friendship might be ruined. That night, Chizuru noticed Hazuki smiling to herself and found it odd. Hazuki in turn suspected Chizuru had just stolen food from the cafeteria. Chizuru handed her an apple and guessed that Hazuki's dedication to the Black Dogs was actually for Romeo's sake. Hazuki's face turned bright red. Chizuru couldn't help but wonder what she really saw in him. Hazuki explained that when she was younger, she had trouble socializing with other kids and spent most of her time studying. Back in grade school, Romeo once complained about his bad grades, so she pointed out his mistakes on a test. Romeo called her a genius and kept asking her to tutor him. Eventually, he got much better grades. He thanked her and asked if they could be friends. From that moment on, Hazuki began to change. She was happy to be useful to Romeo and wanted to stay by his side. Chizuru realized that this was the reason Hazuki had started her training camp. After that, Chizuru went back to her room. Romeo, who had overheard the entire conversation, stepped inside. Hazuki was shocked and embarrassed that he had heard everything. He asked why she was going so far for him, and she admitted it was because she liked him. Romeo was taken aback. He realized that Hazuki was his very first friend, and knowing her feelings made it even harder to keep hiding his relationship with Juliet. Hazuki felt relieved to finally say it. Gathering his courage, Romeo told her that he was dating Juliet. While he appreciated her feelings, he couldn't return them. Hazuki hadn't expected that answer. She even wondered if Juliet was just using him like Chartreuse had implied, but Romeo insisted it was his own choice. Suddenly, Hazuki shouted as if she was about to announce it to everyone. Romeo panicked and quickly covered her mouth. She struggled to break free, saying she was just shocked by what she had heard. Romeo was surprised. He had believed she would understand if he explained it to her. Hazuki then hugged him and draped a white kimono over his shoulders. Romeo swore he never intended to betray the Black Dogs. Hazuki reminded him of their dorm's rule. If someone fell in love or got into a relationship with a white cat, they had to take responsibility in the most extreme way. She reached for the Tuwa sword, saying that even though she was sad, a rule was still a rule and she was willing to follow it herself. Romeo, startled, asked if the sword was just a replica, wondering why so many girls in the school loved carrying swords. He still believed Hazuki wouldn't really hurt him. But Hazuki being Hazuki, wouldn't let him deceive the black dogs. She declared she would deal with him herself if she had to. Romeo bolted. He had completely misjudged the situation. He never expected Hasuki would end up hating him. She chased after him, shouting his name. The commotion woke Kantho and Eigo, who were confused about why Romeo looked so terrified. Moments later, Hasuki caught up, brandishing her sword. In the chaos, the swing of her blade shredded Kantho and Eigo's clothes. Romeo smashed through a window to escape, but Hasuki kept up the pursuit. Not long after, Chizuru woke up from the noise. She was stunned to see Kantho and Eigo standing there without their clothes. She quickly rushed back into her room and locked the door. Meanwhile, the ruckus reached Juliet, who looked out her window. It didn't take long for her to spot Romeo sprinting across the courtyard, desperately trying to get away from Hasuki. Juliet was startled and quickly closed the curtains, unable to understand what Romeo had been doing just moments earlier. Meanwhile, Hasuki was still searching for Romeo in the garden behind the dorm. At that time, Romeo could only hide by hanging onto a tree branch. Before long, Juliet approached him and asked what was going on. Juliet was shocked when she learned that Romeo had told Hasuki about their relationship. Romeo apologized for not informing her first, explaining that he had only wanted to be honest with Hasuki. However, he had overestimated how understanding Hasuki would be. Still, Romeo promised he would find a way to resolve the situation. Before they could talk further, Hasuki pointed her sword at Romeo and asked if it was true that he and Juliet were dating. Romeo asked her to listen to his explanation, but Hasuki, overcome with emotion, swung her sword. Romeo dodged and jumped toward Juliet. Seeing them close together only made Hasuki angrier, and she attacked Juliet. Fortunately, Chartuv appeared in time to block her. Romeo quickly restrained Hasuki while Juliet asked why Chizuru was there. Chartuv apologized and admitted that she had known about Romeo and Juliet's relationship all along. Hasuki was surprised that Chartuv had kept it from her, but Chartuv explained that she had simply been keeping an eye on Juliet against various threats. Then she admitted she had actually come there to kill Romeo. Realizing that both he and Juliet were in danger, Romeo carried her and ran into the garden. Juliet couldn't believe Chartuv had known their secret. When they reached the riverside, Romeo stopped, feeling useless. He spoke about how he had always claimed he wanted to change the world, that he couldn't even convince one friend, and worse, he had put Juliet in danger. Juliet admitted she felt the same, but encouraged him to face them together instead of running away. She told him not to speak so poorly of himself because she believed he could change anything. After all, he had changed her heart. Hasuki and Chartuv caught up with them. Hasuki asked if Romeo was ready to accept his fate, and he agreed. She declared that he had broken the Black Dog Pact and had to be punished. Hasuki charged forward, swinging her sword at him. At that moment, Romeo told her it didn't matter how much she hated him, he still considered her a good friend. Hearing that, Hasuki's mind flashed back to their first friendship as children, and tears welled in her eyes. The sword struck Romeo's head but only left a minor injury. Romeo had suspected all along that the sword was just a replica. Hasuki broke down in tears. Suddenly, Juliet slipped and fell into the river. Romeo immediately jumped in after her, but both Chartuv and Hasuki also dove in to help. When Romeo managed to grab Juliet, he realized with a jolt that he couldn't swim. They began to sink. Hasuki pulled Romeo to safety, while Juliet was rescued by Chartuv. Juliet felt guilty, realizing how much trouble she had caused that day. Hasuki scolded Romeo for jumping in when he couldn't swim. Romeo explained that he had done it because Juliet was in danger. That was when Hasuki understood. Romeo saw Juliet the same way she saw Romeo. She cried, calling him foolish for being the leader of the Black Dogs, yet letting himself be swayed by Juliet. She hurled insults at him, claiming she hated him. The next day, Romeo's friends treated him like usual, which meant Hasuki hadn't told anyone about what happened. Even so, Romeo was still unsure how to face her. Not long after, Hasuki reminded him that the training camp was still ongoing. She was puzzled by the silly look on his face, especially since he was the one who had asked her to remain friends. Romeo smiled at her, but Hasuki warned that she would not overlook what happened the previous night, and if she ever caught him being affectionate with Juliet in front of her, she would have no hesitation in cutting off his head. That day, the boys from the Black Dog dorm were practicing sports. Hasuki was guiding their training, keeping everyone's energy up so they could beat the White Cat students in the upcoming school festival. Meanwhile, Romeo was alone with Juliet in the sports equipment shed. Since they had been dating for quite a while, Romeo asked her for one thing. He wanted to eat something and have her make it for him. Unfortunately, the way he said it was a bit ambiguous and Juliet misunderstood. She thought he was asking for something inappropriate, so she immediately refused and told him to stay away from her. Romeo was confused by her reaction because all he wanted was for her to make him a lunchbox. Once Juliet realized what he meant, she agreed to do it. Romeo then asked what she had been thinking earlier that made her reject him so strongly. Juliet's face turned red, and she told him not to bring it up again. The next morning, Romeo imagined Juliet feeding him his lunch. He couldn't wait for that moment. At the same time, Juliet was in the kitchen, rushing to finish his lunch before classes started. She hadn't expected making a lunchbox to be so difficult. One of the kitchen staff, an older woman, came over after hearing the noise Juliet made while cutting fish. Not long after, the cake Juliet was baking finished, but it was completely burnt. She apologized for the trouble, but the kitchen lady reminded her to rest since she had already been cooking all night. Juliet refused, saying class was about to start. The oil on the stove was already hot, so the kitchen lady quickly turned off the heat. Then a spark came from the microwave. Juliet had accidentally left a spoon inside. Everything she made ended up burnt. Still, Juliet was certain Romeo was eagerly waiting for her homemade lunch. Later, Juliet handed the lunchbox to Romeo while they were near the animal pens. When he saw what was inside, he was surprised that she had made something that looked so delicious. Juliet looked a little down, then asked him to open his mouth so she could feed him. Romeo refused, saying it would be embarrassing. She insisted until he gave in. Just as he opened his mouth, Chartreus's shoe landed right in it. Romeo was irritated and confused by what Chartreuse was doing. Chartreuse explained that she had never eaten Juliet's cooking before, so she wouldn't let Romeo have it. She grabbed the lunch and ran off. She climbed a tree, but when she tried to jump to another branch, her clothes got caught and the lunchbox flew away. At that moment, Scott was training to improve his running speed. The lunchbox landed right on his head. Juliet apologized and told him it was hers. When Scott opened it and saw it had 2 portions, he assumed Juliet had made it for him after learning he had been secretly training for a race. He invited her to share it with him, but before she could answer, Romeo's kick hit him on the head. Romeo managed to take the lunchbox back. Scott accused Romeo of stealing it just to mock him, and Romeo admitted it. Juliet tried to step in to settle things, but Scott stopped her, saying he wanted to teach Romeo a lesson. Juliet couldn't believe they were about to fight over a lunchbox, but Chartreuse seemed to be looking forward to it. Scott attacked and grabbed the lunchbox, but Romeo pulled his hair and kicked his chest, taking it back again. Romeo even called Scott weak, which made him even angrier. Scott countered with a strong attack that knocked Romeo back, allowing him to grab the lunchbox again. Scott declared that protecting Juliet was his duty because she had once helped him when he was lost. Romeo said he didn't care about Scott's past, then uprooted a large tree and dropped it toward him. The lunchbox went flying once again. Romeo chased after it, desperate to get his lunch, but it fell into the pig pen, and the pigs devoured it instantly. Romeo was shocked to see Juliet's hard work vanish in seconds. Scott was upset, and even Chartreuse felt guilty since she had started the whole mess. Scott cried because he couldn't protect Juliet's lunch. Chartreuse pulled him away, saying she wanted to spend time with him. Romeo blamed himself for wasting all of Juliet's effort, but Juliet told him she was the one who should apologize. She admitted she hadn't actually made it. She couldn't cook, so she had asked the kitchen lady to make it instead because she didn't want to disappoint him. Romeo was stunned to realize he and Scott had fought over something the kitchen lady made. Juliet then offered him some cookies she had tried baking herself, even though they hadn't turned out well. Romeo gladly accepted them. She warned him not to expect much from the taste since she had overbaked them. Romeo ended up eating the burnt cookies. Even though they tasted terrible, he kept eating them and said they were delicious. Juliet hit him repeatedly as he continued eating her cookies, but Romeo just laughed and told her she was simply a girl with normal weaknesses. In his mind, Juliet should have just admitted that she couldn't cook, but she wanted to be seen as perfect. Romeo told her to just relax when she was with him, especially since they were secretly dating and nobody knew about it. Juliet promised that next time she would make him a proper lunch and would practice making it when she got home later. Meanwhile, Scott was being treated like a pet pig by Chartreuse and shouted for Juliet to save him. The next day, the White Cats were training under Hisuki's lead. They were incredibly coordinated and full of energy, which surprised Romeo. He couldn't understand why they were so determined to beat the White Cats, and it reminded him of the past. Back then, the White Cats had already been running since morning and were completely exhausted, but Hisuki still told them to keep running. When they complained about being tired, Hisuki, Shizuka, and Nia acted cute and encouraged them, saying their reward would be cold drinks and having their sweat wiped away. Hearing that, the students got fired up and kept training. That's when Romeo realized they were all being driven by attraction. Chizuru arrived with Eigo and Kento, wondering why everyone was so fired up. Romeo was surprised to see that for once, Chizuru agreed with him that the sports festival was a hassle. But Chizuru explained that he simply didn't want to lose to the White Cats and even planned to win by cheating. They discussed placing banana peels during the eating contest and slipping sleeping pills into food to sabotage opponents. Romeo couldn't believe they were taking it that far. Shizuku then banned Romeo from entering any competitions, blaming him for the Black Dog's loss in last year's festival. The two started arguing again, and Hasuki noticed. Nea teased Hasuki for watching Romeo, asking why she hadn't been chasing after him lately like she used to. Hasuki admitted she wasn't sure what to do anymore. Shizuka brought up a popular school myth that if someone won the MVP title at the sports festival and danced with their chosen partner during the closing ceremony, they were guaranteed to become a couple. Shizuka suggested Romeo should dance with Hasuki at the event. Hasuki immediately covered Shizuka's mouth and scolded her. Romeo, thinking the dance meant some kind of traditional folk dance, agreed without hesitation if that's what Hasuki wanted. Hasuki laughed and walked away, while Romeo remained completely unaware of the real meaning behind the myth. The White Cat dorm students continued their training together, chanting cheers that mocked the Black Dogs. Scott was convinced he could win the MVP title and planned to ask Juliet to dance with him at the closing ceremony, which according to the myth would make them a couple. Romeo, irritated by the White Cat's mocking chants, kicked Scott in the head. He couldn't understand why everyone was so hyped over such a silly festival. Scott reminded Romeo that he was the criminal who ruined the 100-meter race in last year's festival and sarcastically asked if he planned to help the White Cats shine again like the year before. Romeo, annoyed by the insult, swung his fist at Scott, but before it landed, a girl named Somali caught it with one hand. Somali admitted she was impressed by Romeo's punch. Abby then told Somali to behave more gracefully. Abby was very popular among the girls, and Somali asked him to praise her for stopping Romeo's punch. Romeo didn't even know who Abby or Somali were. Abby called him out for being out of touch, saying they'd been at the same school for 10 years. Abby introduced himself as a model and the school's #1 most attractive guy, while Somali claimed to be his girlfriend. Shigen said they had made a promise about their future together, but Abby denied it, calling her a dreamer. Abby then turned to Juliet and asked her to go out with him if he won the MVP title. Juliet immediately refused, saying she disliked shallow guys like him. Suddenly, Abby felt an intense, intimidating aura from both Romeo and Scott. Somali suddenly attacked Romeo, thinking he was an enemy of Abby. Romeo was ready to fight back, but Juliet stepped in and stopped him. She asked everyone to calm down and suggested that they settle things at the upcoming sports festival instead. Abby was puzzled by how angry Romeo seemed and wondered if maybe Romeo had fallen for his good looks. Romeo shot back by saying Abby was like a little brat. Abby then vowed to crush Romeo at the sports festival. Suddenly, Somali walked up to Abby and asked if he liked her. Abby responded that there was no way he would ever be interested in a gorilla-like girl like Somali. After that, Abby said goodbye to Juliet and left. Romeo claimed he didn't care at all about the sports festival. When he returned to the Black Dog dorm, Romeo once again found his friends fired up for the event. Out of nowhere, an arrow flew past him. Attached to it was a note saying that Juliet was waiting for him at the field at 5 a.m. the next morning because she wanted him to help her practice for the three-legged race. The three-legged race was a competition where two people had one of their legs tied together and ran while holding each other's shoulders. That meant shoulder-to-shoulder contact and legs moving in sync, something that already made him overly self-conscious just thinking about it. The next morning, Romeo met Juliet at the field. She asked if he had slept well and told him she wasn't very good at the three-legged race. Feeling flustered, Romeo ended up blurting out a comment about her hairstyle, saying it looked really good on her. Juliet then quickly tied their legs together. Romeo's heart started pounding, and in his nervousness, his eyes wandered where they shouldn't have, making him quickly cover his face in embarrassment. Juliet told him to place his hand on her shoulder, but because of their height difference, Juliet's body was slightly lifted. In the end, she decided to wrap her arm around his waist instead. Romeo felt his face heat up even more, struggling to keep his composure. Romeo encouraged Juliet for the upcoming festival. She explained that if she could win the MVP title, it would help boost her appeal in the eyes of the Western students and her father. Romeo's motivation kicked in. Realizing that Juliet was counting on him, he decided he had to meet her expectations. They trained together with great enthusiasm, running all the way to the finish line. Their movements became so in sync that Romeo began doubting Juliet's claim that she was bad at the event. Juliet admitted it was because they started off well and Romeo matched her pace perfectly. She asked if he felt more confident now, reminding him that in the previous sports festival, the score between the Black Dogs and White Cats had been tied, with the 100-meter race serving as the tiebreaker. Back then, Romeo had started too early out of excitement, missing the starting signal. The race was restarted, but he was already worn out and the Black Dogs lost. Juliet told him he had the chance to make up for it this year. She also asked him to relax because if he looked gloomy, it would bring her spirits down too. Romeo realized she was saying that for his sake. Juliet wanted him to give his all in the competition, adding that if she won the MVP, Romeo would have to grant her request. Romeo asked if the same would apply in reverse, and she agreed. With that deal in place, Romeo felt fired up. He began running at full speed during practice and even volunteered to represent their dorm in the 100-meter dash. Hasuki was happy to see his renewed energy, while Chizuru was surprised, knowing that Romeo had initially refused to join any events. The day of Dahlia High School's sports festival finally arrived. At the competition arena, the pride of the Black Dogs and White Cats was on the line. All the students were bursting with excitement. Abby was certain that something unexpected would happen at this year's festival. The Dahlia High School Festival finally kicked off. The competition lasted 3 days for each grade level, with the first day dedicated to the first-year students. Romeo was full of excitement because he wanted to win the MVP award so Juliet would grant him any wish he asked for. Before the games began, each dorm leader gave their opening speech. The leader of the Black Dog dorm encouraged everyone to show good sportsmanship, saying they should compete fairly and honestly. The leader of the White Cat dorm, however, dismissed the Black Dog leader's words as pitiful, making it clear the two didn't get along. Once the speeches ended, the students got ready. Hasuki eagerly invited Romeo to prepare for their first event. While in a rush, she accidentally bumped into Abby. Abby teased her and Romeo quickly stepped in, kicking Abby away and telling him to stay away from Hasuki. Somali, furious, smacked Abby on the head, accusing him of cheating on her. The Black Dog students were shocked that Abby would dare to tease their goddess. Somali kept hitting and scolding him while the others looked on. Meanwhile, Juliet told her friend that the sports festival was a great chance to prove that the White Cats were superior. Romeo, on the other hand, rallied his friends, saying they would make the White Cats regret underestimating them. The crowd roared with excitement as the atmosphere heated up. From each grade, one MVP would be chosen, and one of those MVPs would be crowned the overall winner. Every participant hoped to claim that title. The first event of the festival was the tug of war. The strongest students for each team were already in position, ready to fight for victory. As soon as the referee's starting pistol fired, both teams pulled with all their strength. The Black Dog team's power was unexpectedly fierce. Scott was confused as to why his team felt so weak, but Abby admitted he had never trained his body. He stayed calm, though, saying their team's anchor was incredible. That anchor turned out to be Somali. Even Romeo hadn't expected her to have such incredible strength, strong enough to face the Black Dog team on her own. The Black Dogs struggled against her, but then Abby praised Somali mid-match. Overjoyed by the compliment, Somali's face lit up, so much that she didn't realize she had let go of the rope. Her teammates were frustrated, but Somali remained blissfully happy. As a result, the Black Dog team won the match. The second event was the relay race. Chizuru told Chartreuse he wouldn't hold back. Chartreuse just smiled and Juliet cheered her on. When the starting signal rang out, everyone sprinted forward. Chizuru quickly took the lead, and when he reached a long bridge, he scattered sharp glass on the ground to slow Chartreuse down. But instead of running, Chartreuse was being carried on a litter by other students. Sitting comfortably and sipping tea, she didn't seem interested in racing herself. Her teammates were annoyed that she refused to run on her own, but Chartreuse explained she didn't want to get tired. Chizuru protested to the referee for not calling her out, but Hasuki told him to stop complaining and focus on the race. By then, it was too late. The White Cat team had already won. Juliet congratulated Chartreuse, who was thrilled about her victory. Chizuru was upset about losing, but Kento and Avo praised him for at least confronting the referee. Next came the three-legged race, a balloon-popping contest, and the 100-meter dash. Juliet won the 100-meter race for the girls, while Romeo claimed victory in the boys' division, finally redeeming himself after last year's disappointment. After the first round ended, everyone got a 1-hour break. The score was still tied, and the winner would be decided in the second half. Romeo and Juliet rested together. Juliet mentioned her mother was in the audience, and if she won the MVP, her mother would tell her father about it. Juliet confidently said she wouldn't lose to anyone, not even Romeo. Romeo, equally fired up, was sure he wouldn't lose either. He asked if she would introduce him to her mother, but Juliet refused, saying she would do that in the future. That made Romeo nervous. It meant Juliet was basically expecting them to be together someday. Juliet then urged him to head back to the arena since the next event was about to start. The second half opened with a cheerleading competition, where the girls performed chants to fire up their teams. They were so beautiful and full of energy that Romeo admitted it was hard to pick a winner. Only 3 events remained. At that moment, Abby whispered something to Somali, instructing her to do something. The next game was the pole-toppling event, a mix of offense and defense that looked almost like a battlefield. The male participants were still trying hard to win the competition. Meanwhile, the female participants were equally spirited. Juliet leaped without hesitation toward the enemy line, landing on a pole and continuing to push it. Suddenly, Somali appeared to help her bring the pole down. Juliet wanted to thank Somali, but Somali acted coldly toward her. It turned out that Abby had instructed Somali to harm Juliet, and because Somali had strong feelings for Abby, she was willing to do anything he asked. Chartreuse was shocked to see Juliet in danger. At that moment, the White Cat Girls team managed to bring down their pole and claimed victory. The boys' team managed to bring their pole down at the same time, resulting in a tie. At that point, the White Cat team had a score of 300, while the Black Dog team had 250. The White Cat's lead was largely thanks to Juliet and Somali's teamwork. Chartreuse hurried over to Juliet to check on her, but Juliet acted as if nothing had happened. After that, a mixed-gender relay race took place. If the White Cats won this race, their team's overall victory would be practically guaranteed. Hasuki and Juliet took the role of anchors in the relay. Hasuki confidently stated that she would not lose to Juliet. The runners were entering the final leg, and the race grew increasingly intense. The batons were handed to the anchors, and Hasuki and Juliet sprinted as fast as they could, cheered on by their supporters. Hasuki led the race with fiery determination, but Juliet soon overtook her, causing the spectators to cheer loudly. However, Romeo felt that something was wrong with Juliet. His concern proved correct. Juliet suddenly fell, and Hasuki stopped immediately upon seeing it. Romeo rushed to her side, but Chartreuse held him back, believing that Romeo might corner Juliet further. Chartreuse understood what Romeo was feeling, but asked him to remain restrained. The White Cat students approached Juliet. Scott suggested calling a stretcher, but Juliet refused, scolding Scott for overreacting. She explained that she had simply slipped. Abby arrived, blaming Juliet for ruining the White Cat's hard work. Scott grew frustrated and scolded Abby for speaking so carelessly. Abby's subordinates continued to provoke the crowd, causing some spectators to blame Juliet, which made her increasingly upset. Unable to tolerate the insults, Romeo yelled at them angrily. Chartreuse suspected that Abby had done something to Juliet, but Abby denied it. Chartreuse promised that Abby would regret his actions. He then took Juliet to the student infirmary, leaving Romeo only able to watch helplessly. Everything had gone according to Abby's plan. His next mission was to defeat Romeo in the cavalry competition. Juliet's leg was bandaged, and she could not continue competing due to bruises and scratches on the back of her leg. Romeo blamed himself for not being by her side when she fell and for not being able to help. Chartreuse noted that it was not an accident. He had seen Somali step on Juliet's foot, acting on Abby's orders. Chartreuse was certain it was part of a scheme to bring down Juliet's faction. Lacking proof and authority, he asked Romeo for help. At that moment, Juliet felt weak and believed that weak people could not possibly change the world. Tears streamed down her face. Suddenly, Romeo asked Juliet to watch the next match and requested that she wipe away her tears. He wanted her to see him defeat Abby. The next match was the cavalry competition, which would also determine the overall winner, as the scores of the Black Dog and White Cat teams were tied. Chizuru asked Romeo to bow because he had been chosen to be the horse in the competition. At that time, both the White Cats and the Black Dogs had a score of 300, so whoever managed to endure until the end would win the entire contest. Abby planned to use every trick to secure victory. As the match was about to start, Hasuki cheered for Romeo, but Romeo's team was still not ready. Suddenly, Romeo climbed onto Chizuru's shoulders. The match began, yet Romeo's team had still not moved. Chizuru repeatedly urged Romeo to get down. Romeo pleaded with Chizuru to let him confront Abby. Eigo and Kento were surprised, as Romeo usually did not beg Chizuru, but Chizuru still refused to comply. The match began with Hasuki's team dominating as they managed to collect many ribbons from the opposing teams. Scott approached Hasuki, determined to win on behalf of Juliet. He reached for Hasuki's ribbon, but his hand accidentally brushed against Hasuki's chest. Hasuki quickly blocked him and accused him of inappropriate behavior. Scott immediately defended himself against the accusation. Abby's team realized just how strong Hasuki's team was, but Abby was confident that their victory was still within reach. Sure enough, Shizuka suddenly went limp, her mind completely blank. Seizing the moment, Abby snatched Hasuki's ribbon and even mocked Scott, who had been unable to take it from her all along. Hasuki was frustrated at losing the match. One by one, the Black Dog team started falling, and Hasuki felt that something was wrong. Abby could only smile as his opponents faltered. Kento and Eido suddenly fell asleep, while Romeo remained on top of Chizuru. They continued to quarrel as usual, never able to see eye to eye. Abby's friends were puzzled as to why Kocho and Eigo had fallen into such a deep sleep. since the amount given to them should have only made them slightly drowsy. Abby calmly stated that he was the one controlling the match. By now, only 3 Black Dog teams remained against 10 White Cat teams. Romeo found himself in a precarious position surrounded by White Cat teams. Chizuru hesitated to move, refusing to act as Romeo's mount. Suddenly, Julio shouted to encourage the Black Dog teams, while Chartrude criticized Julio for failing as a White Cat leader. Romeo did not expect Julio's support, and to his surprise, Chizuru's spirit seemed to rise as well, inspired by the belief that Juliet was cheering him on. With newfound energy, Chizuru moved swiftly, allowing Romeo to snatch Scott's ribbon just as Scott's team was about to take it. Chizuru reminded Romeo not to slow her down. The White Cat teams closed in, attempting to take Romeo's ribbon, but even without making eye contact, Romeo and Chizuru's combined strength was unmatched in their grade. If they worked together, no one could stop them. Romeo continued collecting ribbons until only his team and Abby's team remained. Abby felt confident they would win due to their numbers, but suddenly, 2 of Abby's team members went down. It turned out that Eiko and Kento had used a mild electric shock to incapacitate Abby's subordinates. Abby tried to report this to the referees, but Chizuru revealed that he knew Abby had orchestrated all the traps. Earlier, someone had distributed drinks to the White Cat students, and Chizuru discovered that the drinks contained a sleep-inducing substance. He had interrogated the distributor and confirmed that Abby was behind it. Chizuru deliberately did not report Abby because he wanted to witness the destruction of the pride of someone who arrogantly tried to bring others down. Abby looked terrified, but Somali reassured him that she could protect him. Somali then kicked Romeo, but he easily caught her leg. Romeo felt furious seeing Somali's sharp shoes intended to harm Juliet. Abby felt insulted that his trick was called cheap and shared his past of being belittled, criticized, and blamed. He explained that someone weak often had no choice but to resort to cunning. Abby's goal was to defeat Juliet and Romeo, become the MVP, and gain recognition from the elites. He was determined not to lose at any cost. Abby struck at Romeo, but Romeo effortlessly caught his face. Romeo admitted he was fed up with Abby and then threw him out of the arena, shocking the spectators. The organizers announced that the Black Dog team had won, but Romeo refused to accept the victory. He admitted that defeating someone like Abby did not make him feel like a true winner, and there was still someone he had yet to face, Juliet. Romeo shouted, challenging Juliet, declaring that he would not acknowledge victory until he had defeated her. Chizuru was surprised at Romeo's reckless thinking, while Juliet was moved by his words, wondering what exactly was going through his mind. Unexpectedly, Juliet asked Chartrude for assistance in the match. With the approval of both families, the outcome of that year's sports festival would ultimately be decided by a cavalry match between Romeo's team and Juliet's team. The cavalry match between the Black Dog from Romeo's team and the White Cat from Juliet's team had been approved by both dormitories. The match would determine the winner of that year's sports festival. Friends from both dorms were hoping their teams would win. The organizers labeled Romeo as cunning for pushing Juliet to compete despite her injury. Romeo, however, knew that Juliet was not the type to give up just because she was hurt. Juliet, on her part, was determined to make Romeo regret challenging her. Chartreux noticed that Juliet was pretending to be strong even though just standing was causing her pain. When the match began, Romeo tried to grab Juliet's ribbon. Juliet realized that Romeo was giving her a chance to show her skills. Earlier, Juliet had wanted Romeo to fight seriously, and she was confident that she could beat him. The match was extraordinary because neither of them gave the other any advantage. When Juliet felt pain in her injured leg, she summoned all her strength to attack Romeo. They continued fighting fiercely, making the audience tense with anticipation. The spectators shouted encouragements for Juliet to defeat Romeo. Surprised by the overwhelming support, Juliet did not expect so many people to cheer for her. Romeo, meanwhile, did not anticipate that the crowd's opinion could change so easily, especially since Juliet seemed exhausted. Juliet pointed out that Romeo was already panting heavily. During a moment when Romeo attempted to grab the ribbon on Juliet's arm, he accidentally grabbed her chest. Everyone watching was shocked, and Juliet's face turned bright red from surprise and embarrassment. At that moment, Romeo began to nosebleed and fell down. The incident stunned the audience. Romeo could hardly believe he had just touched Juliet and still felt the soft, pliable sensation. The crowd erupted in cheers as the organizers announced that the MVP of the day was Juliet from the White Cat team. The White Cat students were thrilled to hear the news, while Romeo was scolded by his teammates for losing due to such a blunder. Chizuru even gave him a penalty as if he were a war criminal. During the dance event, Scott searched for Juliet. He knew about the myth that the MVP and their dance partner would become lifelong partners, and he hoped Juliet would ask him to dance. Suddenly, Chartreuse appeared and reminded Scott of his punishment for losing in the match. His punishment was to have his head shaved. Chartreuse had prepared a razor and dragged Scott along. Scott screamed, but Chartreuse assured him that he would not actually shave his head. At that time, Romeo seemed to accept his penalty as a war criminal. Feeling that everything had ended, he cried sadly as all the black dogs abandoned him and Juliet ignored him. Suddenly, Juliet approached him and urged him to stay strong. Romeo apologized for the earlier incident, but Juliet asked him not to dwell on it. He was puzzled why Juliet had left the party despite being the MVP. It turned out that the person she wanted as her dance partner was not at the party. Juliet asked if Romeo knew about the sports festival myth. Romeo did not. She then requested him to be her dance partner, and he agreed. Juliet explained that her request was their promise if she won MVP. Romeo admitted he did not know how to dance in the Western style. Juliet offered to dance in the Thawa style instead, especially since her leg was still sore. Romeo demonstrated his dance moves, and Juliet smiled as she remembered how he had asked her to watch the match to see how he defeated Abi. Romeo took Juliet's hand to invite her to dance. Juliet smiled and thanked him. Her smile surprised Romeo. Juliet promised to return his kindness and said she would always protect him no matter what happened. Romeo asked her there was no need to do that. Juliet then imitated the Thawa dance moves Romeo had shown her. Although the movements seemed strange to her, she found them interesting. A month later, all the prefects gathered to discuss that year's sports festival. The final results were as follows. Class 3, the Black Dogs, won. Class 2 was tied, and Class 1, the White Cats, won. Overall, the matches ended in a draw. Kate, the White Cat prefect, asked why the discussion was happening now, a month after the festival. The Black Dog prefect explained that there was information that could not be ignored, as several issues had occurred in Class 1 on the first day of the match. Kate was curious about what kind of issues had arisen. The Black Dog prefect told her not to play dumb since they already knew. Kate laughed and commented that the mischievous kid Romeo was the reason the Black Dog team had faltered in the rematch. She was surprised that the problem was only being brought up when the Black Dog prefect revealed that the issue in Class 1 had been caused by a faction within the White Cats. Annie stated that Abby was found guilty, immediately lost popularity, and her faction was disbanded. The Black Dog prefect reminded everyone that as prefects, they had the duty to protect all students and should conduct joint supervision. However, Kate arrogantly refused to listen, insisting that all White Cats were exemplary students and suggested that the Black Dog prefect should keep Romeo restrained. The head prefect of the Black Dog dorm realized that discussing the matter with the White Cat prefect was only a waste of time and energy. He smashed the table and challenged her to a fight. Kate nicknamed him short-tempered, but NA thought it was actually Kate who had prolonged the discussion, and she wished that Kate would stop breathing forever. When Kate heard this, he asked if Annie was telling him to die. Koku laughed and called them petty people arguing. Romeo had a fever and Hasuki was taking care of him. She checked his temperature. Romeo was sick because he had spent a month acting like a servant for an entire dorm, carrying books and cleaning bathrooms. Hasuki realized that anyone would get stressed doing that, and it turned out Romeo was very sensitive. She picked up the towel Romeo had dropped, intending to use a fresh one to wipe his forehead. But when she heard Romeo mention Juliet's name, she squeezed the water onto his face instead. Hasuki realized that the one who should be pitied was herself, since Romeo liked Juliet and he had rejected her feelings. Holding on to those feelings felt pointless. Suddenly, one of Hasuki's friends asked her for help in a fight. The last time Romeo had a fever was when he was a child. At that time, when his body was weak, his heart felt weak too. He desperately wanted to see Juliet, and he had not seen her since the sports festival. He did not want Juliet to see him in such a vulnerable state. Suddenly, Romeo regained consciousness when someone called his name. Opening his eyes, he saw Juliet standing in front of him. He could hardly believe it and thought he might still be dreaming. When Juliet asked about his condition, Romeo rambled on. She asked if he wanted anything, and he asked to have his ears cleaned. Juliet gently tapped his cheeks to bring him back to reality. Romeo said her small hands felt soft on his cheeks. He still thought it was a dream, but when he fully opened his eyes, he realized Juliet was really there. Embarrassed, he asked why she was there and told her to go home. Juliet told him not to pretend to be strong, especially since he had asked her to clean his ears. Romeo was shocked and wondered who would request something so childish. He tried to force himself to sit up but felt dizzy. Juliet promised to take care of him until he got better, but Romeo refused, saying that Chartreuse had warned him not to let Juliet sneak into the Black Dog dorm again. Juliet handed him a thermometer and told him to accept it as a thank you gift from the sports festival. She would not let Chartreuse or anyone else make decisions for her. She acted on her own will and was ready to face the consequences. Romeo realized Juliet was stubborn but was glad she was taking care of him. She remarked that his room was stuffy and began tidying it up. After Romeo messed up the sports festival, his room had been turned into a dorm storage room, and Hasuki had even become the leader in his place. Juliet felt guilty, but Romeo said it was the result of the decisions he had made. At that moment, Juliet was looking at an adult magazine that Eigo had lent her. Eigo had even asked Romeo to describe how Juliet's chest felt. Romeo blushed intensely, feeling extremely embarrassed. Seeing the magazine, Juliet stared at him, and Romeo explained the misunderstanding. According to Juliet, it was normal for boys Romeo's age. Romeo tried to explain that the magazine was not his, and that he did not care about any other girl's chest. The only one he liked belonged to Juliet. He was shocked at what he had just said. Juliet called him a perverted boy, but then left to get water and food. She asked for directions to the cafeteria, but Romeo fainted again. Even though Juliet had attended Dahlia Academy for 10 years, the Black Dog dorm felt unfamiliar to her. She tried to avoid people while walking past the classrooms, library, and balcony. She wondered why she was wandering around instead of taking care of Romeo. She went to the cafeteria and brought back a drink and an apple for his lunch. At that moment, she was unsure of her surroundings. Chizuru confronted her, asking what she was doing there and who she wanted to see. When Juliet said she wanted to see Romeo, Chizuru immediately ate the apple, saying that there was no food ration for him. At that moment, Julio thought about running away. Chizuru asked how old Julio was, and Julio immediately suspected that Chizuru doubted his identity. He did not want to answer the question. Chizuru held him in place and insisted on knowing who he really was, refusing to let him go until she got an answer. Julio felt threatened because Chizuru had already become that suspicious of him. In a panic, he splashed some water and ran away. Chizuru was surprised that he had fled just because of a simple question. As Julia ran, he wondered how far Chizuru's suspicion went. If she ever caught him and Romeo in the wrong situation, everything would be over. Julio searched for a hiding place and entered a room filled with steam, not realizing it was a girl's bathhouse. The girls soaking inside screamed and wanted to alert the teachers. Meanwhile, Romeo felt worried, wondering if Julia was angry, and kept going home. Suddenly, Julia opened the door to the room, crying. He admitted that the Black Dog dorm was frightening. Because his clothes were soaked, he quickly removed them and asked Romeo to look away. Romeo could not believe he was in this situation, realizing that Juliet trusted him. His face flushed at the thought of Juliet changing clothes in her room, and he tried to control himself. Although he glanced at her briefly, which Juliet noticed, she scolded Romeo and called him a peeping Tom. Romeo apologized, but then Juliet's pants slipped down, and she blamed Romeo's oversized clothing, even though it was actually her wet clothes that caused the problem. Suddenly, Ava knocked on the door, saying he wanted to retrieve one of his magazines. He assumed Romeo was asleep because the door wasn't answered immediately, so he left. Juliet hid under Romeo's blanket, apologizing for panicking earlier and forgetting that her room door was locked. She asked Romeo not to think badly of her. Romeo's face flushed even more, and he felt his body temperature rising. Juliet panicked and asked him to hang on. Romeo remembered that when he had a fever as a child, he felt close to death, and his mother had cared for him tenderly, singing him a lullaby. Unexpectedly, the song Juliet sang at that moment was the same as the one his mother had sung. Juliet apologized for waking him up, and Romeo asked how she knew the song. It turned out to be a popular Western lullaby that helped people sleep, and Juliet's father had sung it to her when she was young. By then, Romeo's appearance looked much better, and his fever had gone down. Juliet checked his forehead, but his temperature rose again when she touched him. Romeo admitted that his mental state affected his fever, and he also mentioned that thanks to Juliet, the stress in his mind had eased. Juliet was surprised at how quickly he recovered. Romeo thanked her for coming to care for him and asked her to go home soon, warning that staying too long could be dangerous. Juliet admitted that she did not come just to take care of him, as she didn't even know he was sick at first. Romeo pressed her for the real reason, but she was too embarrassed to say it. After he continued asking, Juliet blushed and confessed that she came simply because she wanted to see him. Hearing that, Romeo's body temperature rose again. At that moment, Kako, one of the Black Dog prefects, was staring at a picture of Romeo. Teria asked if Kachu liked Romeo, and Kachu explained that as a prefect, it was her responsibility to keep an eye on that mischievous boy. At the library, a few girls from the Black Dog dorm were talking about the upcoming harvest festival they had been looking forward to. They even planned to break the dorm curfew to attend the festival. They suddenly realized that Kachu and Teria were also there, quietly reading books. After finding what Juliet was looking for in the library, she quickly invited Teria to leave. Kochao and Teria were two highly respected girls in the Black Dog dorm. They were regarded as representatives of the teachers and their academic records were perfect. They went to meet the head prefect of the Black Dog dorm to report that several students were talking about the Harvest Festival that would take place near the school. Kocho even invited the head prefect to join them in checking out the festival, but the prefect said there was no need to go because the main duty of prefect was to protect the students. Kocho argued that where there was a festival, trouble could arise, and it was the prefect's responsibility to keep an eye on things. The head prefect explained that she had to complete a punishment assigned by the school and asked Kocho and Tyria to monitor the festival. She also requested that they train their abilities and deal with anyone causing problems. That day, Romeo and Juliet met in secret. Romeo mentioned that the Harvest Festival would be held across the river near the school. Juliet was already aware of it, and students from the White Cat dorm were allowed to go see it as well. Romeo invited Juliet to go to the festival with him and she agreed. He did not expect her to accept. Juliet explained that she did not want to sneak around for now and would go with her friends. Romeo felt sad and cried, realizing that going with Juliet was impossible. He admitted that he did not expect anything from the festival or the fireworks. Juliet promised to sneak away during the fireworks and invited Romeo to watch them together. For a moment, Romeo smiled, but it turned out she was joking and would meet him at the right time. Juliet then left and Romeo shouted excitedly, looking forward to their date. Suddenly, Kocho fell from a tree in front of Romeo and landed in his arms. Romeo did not recognize her at first and asked why she was up in the tree. Kocho demanded that Romeo let her go, saying that his hands touching her could be considered inappropriate. Romeo apologized and explained that he did not expect to have touched Kocho's chest. Kocho was offended by his rude behavior. Romeo assumed she was a middle schooler and thought she should be thankful for being saved. In response, Kocho bit Romeo's hand, causing him pain. Seeing Kocho in danger, Tyria jumped down, landing on Romeo's head. Kocho thanked Tyria for arriving just in time. Kocho revealed that she and Tyria were twins, 14 years old and second-year high school students. Romeo was shocked to realize that the two kids in front of him were actually his seniors. Kocho explained that they had come to save the cat that refused to come down because Romeo was sitting on the park bench. Hasuki arrived and asked what Romeo was doing. Romeo explained that two strange kids were challenging him to a fight. Hasuki was frightened seeing Kocho and Tyria, while Romeo complained that they were annoying. Hasuki immediately apologized to Kocho and Tyria for Romeo's behavior and told Romeo to bow, but he refused. She explained that they were not ordinary kids, they were prefects. Kocho was the pharmacy expert and Tyria was the machinery expert. Hasuki warned that if the prefects were watching, Romeo's freedom would be limited. Hearing this, Romeo admitted that he hated arrogant and stubborn prefects, especially Kocho and Tyria, who were still kids and annoying. Kocho could not accept being underestimated. She explained that age did not matter. If one was blessed with abilities, it should be used to guide and protect others, which was their motto. Romeo was surprised that they seemed to know about him. Kocho even admitted overhearing his conversation under the bench and suspected that Romeo was hiding something. Romeo realized that if Kocho knew about the conversation, he could not bluff her and reluctantly tried to deceive her. He claimed that he had only been talking to ants under the bench. Kocho and Tyria considered him lonely, while Hasuki felt sympathetic and even wanted to introduce Romeo to new friends. Hasuki and Tyria were also surprised to find that Romeo piqued their curiosity. After escaping from Kocho and Tyria, Romeo returned to his room only to find that Kocho and Tyria were already there. Kocho even teased him playfully, leaving Romeo puzzled about why they were in his room and reading his comic. They came across a rosary in Romeo's room and were surprised that someone from the Thawa side would have one. Romeo quickly grabbed the rosary back from Tyria, realizing for the first time that he should not underestimate these two girls. Kocho struck Romeo because she thought he might do something inappropriate to her twin. Noticing the difference in their chest sizes, Romeo began to doubt that they were actually twins. Kocho guessed that Romeo's panic revealed that the rosary was hiding some kind of secret. Romeo immediately ran away and nailed his door shut, only to find Kocho and Tyria waiting outside, even helping him carry a wooden plank. The commotion caught Chizuru's attention. Kento invited Chizuru to the festival, but she declined. Romeo managed to escape from Kocho and Tyria, who continued to chase him. Kocho was certain that Romeo was hiding a secret. Seeing people rushing toward the festival, Kocho suggested to Tyria that they go as well. Tyria was excited at first, but when Kocho mentioned that they had to find Romeo, her mood turned gloomy again. Kocho and Tyria walked through the festival, which was full of food stalls, drinks, and games. Tyria watched people enjoying themselves, while Kocho reminded her that they were prefects. Kocho began searching for Romeo and soon found him walking alone with that troublemaker expression on his face. The fireworks display would not start for a while, but Romeo needed to find a good spot to watch it with Juliet. Kokchao and Tyria intercepted him, and Romeo could not believe they were still following him. Kokchao explained that they were on patrol and, as prefects, had the authority to deal with mischievous black dogs who were too excited and causing trouble. Romeo was surprised to realize that his face had clearly shown his excitement, even though he thought it did not. Knowing that being followed would interfere with his plans to meet Juliet, Romeo ran away, with Kokchao and Tyria quickly in pursuit. Meanwhile, Kokchao and Avo continued trying to convince Chizuru to join the festival activities, but she kept refusing. Scott informed Juliet that he had prepared a special chair for her to watch the fireworks, but Juliet declined because she was afraid of heights. Chartreux immediately sat in this 6-meter-high chair, which made Scott angry, calling her a cat thief. Chartreux confronted him angrily, prompting Juliet to run off in search of Romeo. Kento and Ado kept trying to persuade Chizuru to try the snacks they bought at the festival, but she refused again and walked away. They were puzzled why Chizuru had seemed gloomy lately, even though they had taken her to the festival to lift her spirits. They concluded that Chizuru must have been rejected before, so she needed to meet new people. Not long after, Chizuru returned to them because she was bored alone. At the same time, Kokchao and Tyria were still looking for Romeo, having searched everywhere without success. Tyria guessed that he might have gone into the bushes. Juliet was also searching for Romeo when he suddenly called out to her, startling her. Romeo asked her to hide with him. Seeing Kokchao and Tyria approaching, Juliet asked why the prefects were there. Romeo explained that something had happened and they were chasing him. He then invited Juliet to escape with him, but accidentally stepped on a branch. As Kokchao and Tyria looked in their direction, Romeo and Juliet hid behind a cow. The fireworks festival was about to begin, but first, Romeo and Juliet had to escape from Kokchao and Tyria. They swam across a river, swung from trees, broke through glass, and even jumped onto food stalls to make their getaway. Kokchao and Tyria realized that it seemed Romeo had indeed managed to disappear. Kokchao suspected that there was something behind Romeo's panic about Rosario. Tyria suggested to Kokchao that they just patrol since they could not find him. Romeo and Juliet were hiding inside a barrel, their bodies pressed close together. Romeo could sense Juliet's scent along with the softness of her body. Romeo's inner demon tempted him to embrace Juliet, but his inner angel stopped him because he did not want Juliet to hate him. Conflicting thoughts raced through Romeo's mind, making it increasingly difficult for him to maintain control. He peeked through a small hole and noticed that the two prefects were still nearby. Meanwhile, Scott accompanied Chartreux as she shopped for various items, while Chizuru, Kento, and Ego rode the Ferris wheel together. Kokchao and Tyria were still patrolling, and Romeo kept watching them. Suddenly, a fight broke out between two teenagers, one from the Black Dogs and one from the White Cats. The nearby stall vendors worried that the fight would damage their booths, and some grade school children cried in fear, worried that the fireworks festival might be ruined. Kokchao and Tyria approached the teens. Kokchao pointed out that they had broken school rules by causing chaos at the festival and endangering others, and as prefects, they had the authority to discipline them. Instead of backing down, the teenagers attacked Kokchao and Tyria. However, Kokchao and Tyria easily dodged their attacks. Tyria jumped and threw her net at the White Cat student, while Kokchao used a sleeping spray to subdue the Black Dog student. They quickly handled the situation, and the crowd praised them as role models for helping others, remarking that the world of prefects was truly different. Romeo watched all of this through the barrel hole. He then opened the barrel, stepped out, and asked Juliet to wait for him. Just when Kokchao was about to give up searching for Romeo, he threw a challenge to them. Romeo challenged them to a game duel, stating that if he won, Tyria and Kokchao would have to submit to him. Kokchao refused, explaining that prefects did not play around. Romeo insisted that it was not mere play but a duel, and if they refused, he would destroy the game booths. Reluctantly, Kokchao accepted the challenge. They competed in various games, from shooting games, hammer smash games, and eating contests to cake throwing. Kokchao and Tyria genuinely enjoyed the games, and even Tyria, who usually maintained a neutral expression, smiled happily. Although Romeo lost the games, he complained that it was unfair to face two opponents at once. Kokchao asked what game would come next, but Romeo said the duel had already ended. Kokchao grew thoughtful again. Romeo then asked whether his punishment had been decided yet and offered to play again any time. He understood that Kokchao and Tyria probably needed someone to play with at the festival. Previously, Romeo had asked other friends about them, and in their eyes, Kokchao and Tyria were always together, so others felt hesitant to approach them. Romeo praised their hard work as prefects and forgave their occasional spoiled behavior, noting that they were still young. Kokchao refused to be called a child, saying she already felt mature, and suggested that Romeo was the one who truly needed a friend. They asked Romeo to prepare because next time they would invite him to play again. Afterward, they parted ways. Romeo suddenly realized he had to return before the fireworks started, but the first fireworks had already gone off before he could meet Juliet. Everyone enjoyed the fireworks together, and Romeo regretted missing the chance to watch them with Juliet. He quickly opened the barrel and asked Juliet if she was angry with him. Juliet said she was not upset. It was the first time she had seen fireworks from inside a barrel. Romeo worried she would be mad and apologized. Juliet smiled, saying she had seen enough. Noticing that Cocchu and Tyria also wanted to have fun, and she had observed Romeo's gentler side, which was enough for her. Romeo felt touched. He brought a small firework for them to light together. Juliet commented that it was simple, just like Romeo, that she liked it. Romeo was surprised to hear that. Meanwhile, Tyria admitted that they had enjoyed the festival thanks to Romeo. Coco suspected that Romeo liked Juliet but confessed that she already liked someone else. Tyria asked whether Romeo would become a prefect that year. Coco thought that if Romeo became a prefect, it would bring significant changes to the school, but they still had Aru, the vice prefect of the Black Dogs. Juliet's birthday was only 7 days away, and Chartreuse could hardly wait. He kept thinking about what kind of gift would be perfect for her. Juliet had just finished bathing and wondered why Chartreuse looked so excited. He admitted that he had been imagining how lively Juliet's birthday party would be. That day, Juliet had a request for Chartreuse. Blushing and feeling shy, she finally spoke up, but Chartreuse was surprised when he heard what she asked. Meanwhile, Romeo was also eagerly anticipating Juliet's birthday. He thought about what gift he could give her, and wished he could spend the day together with her. Suddenly, Cocchu appeared and startled Romeo, causing him to instinctively jab a pen in her direction. He scolded her for barging into his room without permission. Romeo then looked for Tyria, only to discover that she had been hiding under his bed since the previous night. He was shocked to see her. Cocchu explained that if Tyria liked someone, she would follow that person anywhere. Romeo called Tyria a stalker and realized that he would have to be more careful in the future. Tyria invited Coco to go shopping in Dahlia Town. Coco was reluctant to go and asked Romeo to go instead since they were busy. Romeo agreed immediately, seeing it as a chance to buy a gift for Juliet. Upon arriving at the market, Romeo saw various stalls selling clothes, flowers, and household items. He realized that buying a gift was not as easy as he had imagined, especially since he did not know exactly what Juliet liked. When he spotted a white cat plush, he became certain it would make her happy. To his surprise, Chartreuse had the same idea. They both grabbed for the plush at the same time, startling each other and ending up in a tug of war that tore the toy. Romeo cursed Chartreuse, who appeared upset, which was unusual for him. Chartreuse admitted that he disliked Romeo, and Romeo retorted with the same sentiment. A security officer tried to intervene but was shocked to find that Chartreuse' master was present. The officer questioned the situation, and Chartreuse explained that he had permission from a teacher to leave the dormitory. Romeo was surprised by Chartreuse' sudden shift to a more polite demeanor. The security officer warned them that a radical group from Falway was hiding on the island. He asked Chartreuse to return to school, but Chartreuse could not leave without a bodyguard. He thought about how to handle the situation, but still prioritized finding the perfect gift. Eventually, he claimed that he had brought an extremely strong bodyguard from the west. Chartreuse pulled Romeo into a stall and dressed him up like a white cat student and presented him to the security officer. Later, Romeo led Chartreuse to an alley and insisted he did not want to act as his bodyguard, fearing that their disguise would be discovered. Chartreuse also did not want to go along with it, but had no choice. Romeo refused to follow Chartreuse' selfish whims and even said that if Chartreuse wanted his help, he would have to kneel first. Chartreuse reminded Romeo that he was looking for a gift for Juliet and claimed that he knew better what she wanted. He offered to help happily. Romeo wanted to know but insisted that the gift would be more meaningful if he chose it himself. He was confident that Juliet would appreciate whatever he gave. Chartreuse believed that Juliet would have high expectations for the first gift from her boyfriend and urged Romeo to consider her reaction carefully. Giving the wrong gift could jeopardize their relationship. Romeo, of course, did not want that to happen. He agreed to act as Chartreuse' bodyguard on the condition that Chartreuse tell him exactly what Juliet wanted. They wandered through the market together. Romeo warned that if Chartreuse asked for anything strange, he would stop being his bodyguard. Chartreuse led Romeo into a lingerie store, which made him extremely embarrassed. Romeo assumed Chartreuse intended to buy lingerie for himself, but he was actually shopping for Juliet. Chartreuse picked a set of nightwear that made Romeo faint just imagining it. Romeo suggested a more modest choice, opting for bare-patterned lingerie that was warmer. Chartreuse called Romeo's choice boring but praised it when he imagined it. He still preferred string lingerie, while Romeo liked lace. Juliet, feeling uneasy, was willing to be taken care of for 24 hours. Chartreuse showed Romeo a bra he thought would suit Juliet. Suddenly, his attitude shifted, and he asked Romeo not to speak to him. Romeo was confused by Chartreuse's mood and behavior. All day they wandered through the market without picking a single gift. Romeo became certain that Chartreuse did not really know what Juliet wanted. Chartreuse, meanwhile, was puzzled because Romeo claimed to be Juliet's boyfriend yet seemed unaware of her preferences. He questioned whether Romeo and Juliet were truly a couple. Romeo, frustrated, explained that Juliet did not talk about him much. Chartreuse, surprised that Romeo called himself her boyfriend, suggested that their relationship should end soon. Suddenly, a heavy storm drenched the city. At that moment, Koku and Tyria were curious whether it was really okay to let Romeo go into the city. Koku wondered what Romeo was doing in Dahlia City. She asked Tyria why Romeo had a rosary, even though he was not a white cat. Suddenly, Aeru appeared and asked what Koku and Tyria were talking about. The rain continued to pour in Dahlia City, forcing Romeo and Chartreuse to take shelter until it stopped. Chartreuse felt frustrated because it seemed like something bad always happened whenever he was with Romeo. Romeo helped wring out Chartreuse's coat with force, but Chartreuse scolded him for being too rough, which even caused the coat to tear. Romeo urged Chartreuse to put on his coat quickly because his wet clothes had become transparent over the chest area. Chartreuse teased Romeo by asking if he wanted to hold him, but Romeo avoided the topic.